Unshelling Medicine podcast. Healthcare in the language we understand.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unshelling Medicine. I have the pleasure of having a conversation today with an incredible woman who is using her journey and her story to enlighten others, advocate for others, and just basically pull the curtain back. I have Elizabeth Mikotowicz. Elizabeth is an artist, she's an author, and she's also an advocate. And her recent book is why we're going to have this conversation today. The book is No Justice, Just Us. Heavy title. Let's get into it. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. And yes, it is a heavy title. And it's funny because the very first cell I was in when I got incarcerated, someone had written on the wall, "There's no justice in the system. It's just us in the system." So I shortened it and it stuck with me. And yeah, now I can present it all to you.
Somebody wrote that on the wall. No justice in the system, just us in the system. And you said when you got to the cell, as a message that stood out to you. Was any of that true?
Yes, it was all true. I grew up as a privileged white kid with middle-class parents. I was never exposed to violence or drugs or anything like that. My parents had a messy divorce and my mom remarried, and her new husband, my new family, he was great, but one of my new step siblings was awful. And she was the mean girl cheerleader in high school. And I wanted to be accepted by her so bad. And even when people at school would come to me with horror stories, I'd end up gaslighting them in her defense. And, now that I'm an adult, I feel really bad about that. All the bullying she used to do to me, I would take to heart. And it caused me a lot of insecurities. And then later in life, when I got with these abusive men, it was kind of like the same dynamic, only there was violence involved now. And when I got out of prison, she would trash talk me to my kids and drag me for my addiction, even though I was now sober. Like, I had 5 years of sobriety and she's still talking cash money to my children, to whoever will listen. And then my family's letting her drive around drunk with my kids. And I'm going like, y'all dragged me for becoming an addict. And like, I tried to say no. Like, my situation was traumatic where I literally almost got murdered to the point my skull was showing. And the doctors are pumping me full of opioids. And I didn't know how to advocate for myself then either. I was young. I was like 20 when this happened. And I didn't know how to stand up for myself. And, I was told I was on too small of a dose. I was told only 2% of people get addicted. And then when I tried to refuse it, I was threatened with Child Protective Services because I was pregnant. I'm looking at her going, you have your own business, your own salon. You've never been under the threat of anything but your own narcissistic ego. And you want to come at me? I didn't want to get addicted. I didn't strive for that. I even tried to refuse, and I got threatened with Child Protective Services. And I don't say that for people to feel bad for me. I say that because this is the system that we're in. Every 7 to 10 years, there's a new substance on the streets, and it sweeps America in ways that doesn't sweep other countries because it's profitable for the big pharmacy companies and it drives prison numbers up. And then once we're labeled addicts, they can take our kids, traffic them in the state. And as the Epstein files prove, that's where the kids are going. And not only that, but once we go to prison, we work for pennies a day. I worked 40 hours a week and made $5.25. And so, had I gotten pulled over drunk with children in the car, CPS would have taken my kids. But because she was in a higher bracket of money and status, she just had to pay her way out of it. And I was put on all these different medications in prison, lithium, bad medications that if something goes wrong, it goes really wrong. And I was in psychosis, and she hadn't talked to me in 5 years, and she decides to trash me all over a public social media platform regarding my children that she had already been getting in their ear about me and trying to turn them against me. And I was in psychosis when this happened, and it ended with a trip to the emergency room. And when you're in psychosis, well, for me anyway, when I had that suicide attempt, it was like somebody pushed me outside of my body. And I was like watching myself, like, it's so bizarre. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like in Doctor Strange, when they like push somebody out of their body and it's like the astral projection type thing, that's what it felt like. And so I had this person, my biggest childhood bully, trashing me and just not leaving me alone. I ignored it the first few times. And then she just kept on and she kept escalating every single time. And it finally resulted, I had to get 7 stitches. I literally opened a vein and, it was all for her narcissistic ego. And like, she's never been under the threat of anything but her own ego. Like, I've literally survived horrific assaults to the point where my skull was showing, and I still get seizures to this day from that injury. I still go deaf and blind for moments at a time from that injury, and my family didn't protect me, and that's fine. I learned how to protect myself, but it irritates me because, I'd been through so much worse than that, but it was like that inner childhood wound. I was in a mental health crisis and not able to deal with it. And once I got arrested and I go to jail, I saw America for what it really was. And it broke my heart because I wanted to believe in freedom and justice for all. I thought racism and, the systematic issues were over with the civil rights movement. That's how I was raised. And that's so wrong. I met women who were sterilized against their will in prison. They didn't look like me. And these were American women. And this was before Trump opened all the ICE concentration camps. That was before that. And, you're realizing that this is all by design. So a couple people at the top can make a bunch of money. And even, the telephone communication devices, there used to be contact visits in jail. Well, the last 10 years, they realized, well, if we do no contact visits, companies who create these telecommunication devices can make money off of inmates and their families. And then you find out that the CEO of the telecommunication device, he was on Epstein Island, because of course he was. Like, who wants to make money off of preventing children from hugging their incarcerated parents? And 70% of incarcerated women had some sort of domestic violence or sexual assault before we even got arrested. And that's what happened to me. And once you're labeled an addict, once you're labeled an inmate or a criminal or a felon, nobody cares if your human rights are violated. And that is something that we need to look at as Americans. Like, what are we really allowing here and what are we okay with? Like, you hear someone's an addict. Oh, well, they shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have done this. Well, most addicts start out as pain patients or, given some ADHD stimulant. That's usually how it starts out. Nobody wakes up and goes, I want to be a junkie. I want to throw my life away and stick needles in my arms and, be a trash human being. Nobody does that. And there's this like misconception here where, if somebody's labeled a certain way, it's okay, whatever happens to them. And it's not. And predators flock to these institutions for employment. I mean, they keep saying that they train our law enforcement with the IDF, and that tracks. That really tracks, because with police, they have a higher domestic violence rate with their officers in their personal relationships than anybody else in this country. And it was a hard pill to swallow that, I had been going along with this system of white supremacy and bigotry and just like thinking everything was fine. And it wasn't. If I had been a Black woman, I would have gotten a lot more time than 3 years. I was really lucky that I only got 3 years. The judge felt bad for me that I was, a domestic violence victim or survivor, whatever you want to call it, and that I was untreated bipolar. Well, I'm not actually bipolar. I'm neurodivergent. I tested significantly high for autism, and, the bipolar, if I was bipolar, the bipolar meds would work and they'd fix me and I'd do better. Instead, they put me in psychosis and I become a danger to myself and I can't leave my house. And that's another thing. Once somebody is labeled with a mental health issue, it doesn't matter what they say. They could say the sky is blue and someone's going to be like, well, you have mental health issues, so we can't take that seriously. It's like, that doesn't mean I don't understand what's going on. It just means I get a little more emotional here and there, and I process things differently.
A lot has been said, from injustice to trauma, childhood trauma to domestic violence, injustices in the criminal justice system, and then to misdiagnosis. So the first thing that I want to ask, how is the relationship between you and your children? Given all that negativity they heard about you.
Yeah.
So how is that relationship today?
I mean, it's definitely strained, but I still talk to them. I just went up to Maine for my son's graduation. They're both in college now, and I'm really proud of them. And I think my daughter, sometimes it's easier for her to be upset when I leave. Like when I go back to Louisiana, sometimes it's, that's how she felt. And she told me that she goes I just felt like I didn't have control. And she didn't, because, my life was a mess. And I kept having people tell me, oh, well, you got to get it together. You got to get your priorities together. And then they wouldn't help me. That's pretty much talking to the wind. Obviously, I know I need to get my life together, but I didn't have health care. Once I signed temporary guardianship over to my father, because once that head injury happened, I was going into seizures and waking up on the ground, not knowing how long I was out for. And I had toddlers running around, and I'm going to wake up to a tragedy one of these times. If you have kids, you have to be conscious, especially at that age. And so, I've been called a deadbeat. I've been called every other thing under the sun. And it's like, well, if I had kept them and something awful had happened, you would have blamed me for that too. And our country loves to blame women for everything. And, I did what I could. I got them to a safe place. And then, I let that psycho chased me around the street. I went to a battered women's shelter, and first they called me a liar because I wasn't crying like all the other women. And it's like, well, I'm neurodivergent. I don't express emotions the same way as other people. And I was very cold and in that shell shock mode. And because of that, they didn't believe me. And then when I got the police reports, they were like, oh my God, they did a complete 180 and said that my injuries were too extensive and my situation was too dangerous, and it put the other women in the shelter in danger. And mind you, once I signed temporary guardianship over to my father because I was homeless, that took away my health care. So now I was self-medicating on the street, and I had no way of making myself better. And I had this addiction that was slowly, becoming worse. It's not like I just became an addict overnight. I had this prescription for a few years, and it just slowly got worse. And then I lost my health care, and things spiraled. And the only people that helped me were drug dealers and outlaws. And I was scared, backed into a corner. I had exhausted all other options that I could find, and nothing worked. Nobody would help me. And I eventually became a drug dealer and then caught charges. And unfortunately, some of the sociopaths I met on the street were far worse than my ex. I mean, there were pictures of medieval devices in my discovery that were specifically invented to make people suffer. I don't want to use the exact word because of whatever, but yeah. And this is all in my book. And I will never forget being in jail and getting my discovery. It was 16,000 pages long, and it came in boxes. And I was going through this paperwork, and I'm having this epiphany. I'm sober, and there's no blaming it on the drugs this time. When weird things would happen around certain people, I would blame it on the drugs, or I'd be like, I was just high. Why would this person do that? For instance, we were standing outside one day, and he randomly goes, there's a lot of red cars out today. There's nothing threatening about that. There's nothing bizarre about that. And then all of a sudden, 4 red cars drive by. And it was designed, he was doing that to mess with my mind and make me fearful and make me think that he was more powerful than he was. And at the time, he had backing from some very sophisticated criminal groups, and it went to his head. And he was one of those mediocre white men who was mad because he never got the girl he thought he deserved. And he turned dark and he turned predatory. And I watched him escalate in ways that I did not even know were possible. I mean, my phone, all of my text messages on my phone would go to his. He tracked me. Every device I had, he somehow got into it, even when I wasn't around him. But then I found out later on, like, he was working for the feds the whole time, and they were giving him technology, or I believe they were giving him technology. And this was back in 2011, before the Apple, tracking devices came out. Like, this was before that. And so this was like terrifying, and having to unpack it, when you finally sober up and you realize, like, no, that was not a hallucination, that really happened. And the mental spiral that came after that was pretty horrific. And my book goes deep into all of this. So, massive trigger warning. If you are a woman who's been stalked or abused, this book is definitely for you.
So that is all very scary stuff, right? And kudos to you for telling your story, because some people would die with it, understanding how traumatic it is, not only to relive it, but for other women who may be reading your book. So I want to touch on the addiction part, because, you rightfully said nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to, throw my life away. I'm just going to find the most dangerous substance and just,
right.
Just, eliminate myself or just mess myself up.
Absolutely.
It usually starts out, either by accident, or either there's a saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
It always starts with good intention, where somebody, starts, a medication to help support whatever, and then there's this dependency on it, right? So if you don't know, how was that journey for you? You talked about your background growing up pretty middle class and all of that stuff, things that, most people would aspire to at least have, because again, let's talk about reality of systemic racism, which you brought up. We love to water down education in the American school system. Civil rights, Martin Luther King came and everything was like, oh, which is a lie, right?
Yeah.
Many people live under the guise of that everything is okay now, we're all fine now. And when anybody actually talks about their lived experience, it turns into complaining, noise, fussing, or, it's not even real, we're not racist, right? So please talk on your experience, especially coming from a background. I wouldn't quite say affluent, but a comfortable background.
Right.
Just take us down.
So my addiction, there's the addiction part, and then there was the chronic pain, which was also attached to my addiction. And then there was the trauma. So I was told by a counselor that is the most dangerous type of addict, because you're not just dealing with addiction, you're dealing with, the medical problem and the mental health problem on top of it. So like every time, my chronic pain would kick in, my brain is going, you need this substance or you're going to die. And that was really hard to overcome and kind of unpack. And, opioids literally make the pain receptors in your brain more sensitive. So when they wear off, your pain is going to come back twice as bad. And the pharmacy companies knew this. And to profit off of that is so evil and just disgusting. Like, we have immoral capitalism. We really need better legislation. Like, if you are profiting off of people's suffering, that's a problem. And of course, they all came out with Suboxone and methadone. But there's another treatment called Ibogaine, and it resets the addict's brain. And they will never allow it in America because the pharmacy companies make too much money. And I'm a big advocate for Ibogaine. You literally have to go to like Mexico or Sweden to get that type of treatment. And it's just unnecessary. I read an article about a pharmacy tech, and they found a cure for diabetes, and they brought it to the bigwigs at the pharmacy company, and they're going, well, that's great, but that will lose us money. Cures lose us money. You know, they found a cure for herpes and genital warts and all these other things that, you know, they can give you medications for. They make more money off of the Band-Aid medications than off of cures. So that's what they're going to stick with. And that's what they
But
want to
there's
keep
no
doing.
money in cure. It's not a matter of they make more money. There's no money in cure. If you have to come back to me and depend on me to do something for you, you know, depending on what part of my ego you're feeding, I'm going to have you depend on me, right?
Right.
However, you know, if I show you how to do something, then you don't need me. It goes in line with that. Teach a man how to fish, right? And he'll feed himself. Give a man a fish and you feed him forever. So why don't I give you a fish and forget the hook, line, and sinker? Don't worry about it. It's too much work. Just come to me. I'll take care of it for you. The dependency is very bad, I think,
Yeah.
and it is designed that way. It's designed with
It
intention.
absolutely is.
Yeah. So there's plenty of cure for many things. However, there's no profit in curing something, especially
Right.
in the American healthcare system that is more reactive than proactive, right?
Right.
Because if we react to the symptoms presenting, you know, we'll just put a band-aid on it, like you said, you know, treat the symptoms and the underlying cause is there, right? Mention methadone. Why is methadone in existence, right?
Right.
Because, all right. So are we treating the addiction or we're giving a substitute for what could be potentially dangerous?
Right. And
Okay.
the withdrawals from that are usually more dangerous than, you know, withdrawals from opioids. And they last longer too because it's synthetic. Now, I'm not knocking methadone or Suboxone. You know, I've been on and off Suboxone since I got out of prison, and it's
Right.
kept me sober. It, you know, it
Mhm.
saves lives. I am not, you know, trying to dissuade anybody from taking that because it
Absolutely not.
saves lives. It saves
Absolutely
lives.
not. Absolutely not. But Elizabeth, if granted, these are all medications that have helped you maintain your sobriety, maintain your health, and maintain your sanity, right? If
Yeah.
you had two options, manage your sobriety, manage your addiction, manage your mental health, as opposed to basically have a total reset and just start with a clean slate, which one would you pick?
I'd start with a clean slate.
Okay. So I think that is the broader conversation because you mentioned Mexico, you mentioned, I think it was Switzerland. Where did you mention another country to get the medication
Ibogaine.
you? Yes.
Ibogaine, it resets the addict thing.
Right. So I think most people will pick a clean slate because it gives a chance of a restart.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about support. Not everybody has support. And we're quick to label people addicts. I absolutely despise it. I,
Right.
I despise it. Somebody's an addict. Somebody's addicted to something. Unfortunately, it usually starts small. It
Yeah.
starts very innocently, and some of us are more prone to addiction than others, right? Just because you are in a certain category doesn't make you a better person than the person being addicted to anything. Addiction is
Right.
not only drugs, but drugs are damaging. Alcohol, you mentioned, I don't really want to talk about your sister because I do understand the damage that, you know, let me climb on this soapbox very quickly. I'll get off, I promise. So this soapbox is one that I'll always carry around. I think a lot of children get broken in a nuclear family or
Yeah.
a family system. So when children are not built and, you know, the first advocate is a parent, the first advocate is a sibling. If parents just kids will be kids. Oh, they'll get over it, they'll grow out of it. Most kids that are bullies grow into adults that are bullies. We've
Yeah.
worked with them, we've engaged with them, we've encountered them at some point. So it is very important to step in a less than stellar dynamic to teach our kids to be nice to each other. Because
Right.
unfortunately, what is happening is that you're setting a precedent for the child on the receiving end to think it is normal to be treated as a subpar human. And that can lead to a lot of dangerous things. And you're also setting a precedent for the child who's picking on a sibling to not take accountability and feel like, yeah, you know what does not smell. Right. So that's that. When it comes to history and the American system, if you want your children to learn the real history, do not depend on school. I think this is the thing that I admire about the Black community, the Black American community, even as myself as an immigrant. I have taken, I've derived so much joy in focusing and learning and also being in a position to teach my own children. The school systems are very, 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 very
They're awful.
influenced. But, do you know the history of that? The Daughters of the Confederates? Have you ever heard about that group?
I have not, but I know that the tests that they do in schools for like 6th and 8th graders to see their reading levels that all the kids across America take, those are literally to find out how many kids in that generation are going to go through the prison systems. Like that's what they plan on. It's like it helps with the pipeline. And like they're not for reducing crime. They make money off of crime. And we have more prisons than we do colleges.
Yes. And that is designed. That is very intentional. So the Daughters of the Confederate or the Confederacy are mothers and daughters from very, very much, this is history. You're not going to learn this in the American school system. After the Civil War, so the women, the wives of the Confederate soldiers, right, formed this organization that infiltrated school system to dictate what was going in the textbooks. That is why you don't have the American history. That is why DEI or DEI,
I know what you're talking about.
critical race theory was fought so hard. Okay,
and that's why when they talk about slavery, it's like, oh, they got good work ethic, and
So that is all the work of the Daughters of the Confederacy. So they started in the South and it's countrywide. So they dictate what goes in the books, the history books, to water down what people are actually experiencing. So if you're listening to us and somebody of my hue, darker, lighter, in between, tells you about the experience, their lived experience, believe them. Because whatever you learned in school or you grew up hearing, your very enclosed, white family talking about the experiences are what they believe America is. It is not the same experience for everybody else. It isn't. Fortunately, it takes somebody like you, Elizabeth, who has been in the trenches, because I don't know what else to call it.
Right.
To really, come face to face with reality. Because other than that, if you did not have this experience and a Black woman who's gone through the prison system tells you about being sterilized against their will, being, assaulted repeatedly by the predators that depart, or basically being left to suffer with a chronic condition without healthcare intervention, you would say, well, that is not true.
That's just a secluded, event. Like that was just a bad apple. Yeah,
that was a one-off. Yeah, it doesn't happen. One-off, that is not what we see on the news. So unfortunately it takes, and kudos to you, applaud you, because you could have just had this experience. You could have shut your face and everything that is you, and you kept it pushing and like, hey, let me worry about myself and get myself better. But no, you're telling your story and you're telling the story how it is, because again, you have seen the truth for what it is. And, thanks for using your platform or creating a platform to be able to advocate for other humans, because this is where community, when Black men and women, and, talk about being in community with people that are actually advocates and actually using their privilege for good. This is an example of that.
Well, thank you.
Recognize what you have and you're using it for good, and good on you, girl. On you. And
Thank you.
it's not easy
I
to.
go deep into this in my book, like my whole like decolonization process of how I'm realizing like what is going on. Like this is a horror show. And it's crazy because I remember, I think it was like second or third grade. My mom was telling me about how she doesn't celebrate Columbus Day because of what he did to the Native Americans and how awful he was to the Native Americans. Well, I repeated this in class about how he like raped and, brutalized Native Americans and like cut their hands off. I said something wild and kind of like graphic, but it was factual. And I got in trouble for saying that. They
Of
told me I was
course.
disrupting class, and it was like this experience. I didn't understand it at the time, and I was just like, "What? Why am I getting in trouble?" Like I was participating in the conversation and trying to be a good student and just sharing what I had heard. And no, they literally punished me for saying the truth. They want to whitewash everything. And, fragile white egos are so exhausting. It's like y'all can rain down the violence, but when somebody talks about it, that's way worse. Like, give me a break.
I'm happy the way you're putting it because it's kind of like, I'm going to pee on your leg really quickly or slowly, whatever. I'm just going to stand here and pee on you. How dare you complain? How
Right.
dare you? I'm dehydrated as all hell, right? So the thing is stinky and the worst color ever. But you're supposed to stand here and just take it. That has been the experience.
Right.
It's awful, but more and more people are realizing this is the one of the benefits of social media platforms and information being readily available.
Right.
We're out banning books now that are telling the truth. So, we're now banning accounts and people that are actually, factually telling their stories and, telling the truth and having people live in fear. So, about your book, let's go back to your book. So,
Sure.
where can a person get a copy if they want to read your book, Elizabeth?
So the ebook is available on all the platforms. The paperback is currently only available on Amazon. I formatted it on Kindle, and none of the other platforms work well with that. So I'm still trying to figure out or find somebody that's affordable and can like do it for me because every time I upload it, like half the book turns into symbols, and it's just really annoying. I was an artist in prison too, and I painted the cover. I go
Oh,
into my addiction story, my case. I was one of the first people to go to prison over bath salts. And this is one of those weird things that nobody knows about. Like there are all these synthetic drugs that are in gas stations and, head shops. And they've been labeled plant food, bath salt, not for human consumption. And what happened was around the year 2000, an Israeli chemist realized what his goal was to find a way for people to elevate their consciousness without going to prison. So he took like crack, cocaine, all of these different substances, and he just tweaked it a little bit in a lab. And so it would become a whole new substance. Well, they banned all of this in Israel. And then 7 to 10 years later, it magically showed up all across America. And the government was making tax money off of it. And this is what makes me so angry about it because, my dumb ass back then, who was still not decolonized yet, I was like, there's no way the government would allow an addictive substance to be sold over the counter with no oversight. And the vendors would have it mass produced in China because they didn't have as many regulations for the factories. So it set China up to take the international fall because of course they did. And, the prison numbers skyrocketed, the children in DHS custody skyrocketed, and, it just fed the prison pipeline. And, these drugs couldn't be tested on, the normal tests that they have because it was a whole new substance. So, it got really complicated for law enforcement. So It is a true crime memoir that I break this case down in, and the conspiracy laws, how there are tens of thousands of Americans incarcerated right now for ghost weight. It's weight that they were never actually caught with, but somebody said they were. So you have some snitch say, oh, Elizabeth sold me 3 ounces every week for a month or for 6 months. I would be charged with 3 ounces a week for 6 months or however long. And they have no proof of it. They have no
Wow.
evidence of it. These are the conspiracy laws in America. And it's so funny to me because they love to call people a conspiracy theorist when they want to shut down, people asking questions, or if it's a topic they don't want to take accountability for. But they are so quick to lock up civilians for the conspiracy laws. And it is so unconstitutional. And, all they need is 2 or 3 people saying that you did it and you're screwed. So they have these CIs and these snitches who are being blackmailed with years of their lives, being threatened with, time in prison if they don't tell these cops, what they want to hear to get them another conviction. And it's disgusting. And as a woman who went to prison in America, we were making our own tampons in there. Like I said, I made $5.25 a month. That would not buy a box of tampons in prison. They jacked the prices up. So you have to buy it. It's the only place to buy it. You can't get these things for yourself any other way. And so when I watched Israeli hostages be released from Hamas, and if they want to call Hamas terrorists, fine. I don't care. Let's call them terrorists. But why are terrorists doing better on the humanity scale than American institutions? Because those hostages literally said when we needed feminine hygiene, they gave it to us. No questions asked. I know women in America who had to show their menstruation to cops before it was even considered them be given the dignity of feminine hygiene. Like, this is how they're treating women, grown women in prison. They're literally making them prove they're menstruating before they even, what is wrong with you that you would degrade somebody like that? Prove to me you're bleeding and I might give you hygiene. That is disgusting to me. We cannot continue to stand on a pillar of morality and integrity and claim that we're the most moral nation in the world when we're doing that to our own citizens.
That is so sad. That is so sad.
Yeah. I mean, it was just enraging for me. And then, I will forever be grateful for that experience, as awful as it was, and everything I lost, because I spent time with Black women and they got to know me enough to trust me to tell me their stories. And I realized I lived a completely different life and reality from these women. And when white women have babies in the hospital, well, I wouldn't now that the whole Epstein thing has come out. I would never do this now. But when the nurse came in to take my baby to the nursery so I could get some sleep, I was relieved. I was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I didn't know that it was common knowledge and bare minimum rules of safety in the Black community. You never let a nurse take your baby out of there. You think Black women would never let a nurse take their baby into the nursery because it might not come back. And that is
somebody goes with the baby. If the baby must go to the nursery for anything, family member or somebody goes with the baby.
Yeah. I had no idea that was, a thing. And they're
This is why when Black women say things, and, if you don't have that lived experience, listen. Shh. Listen, right? Okay? Things that I say to my kids, no white kid around them have the same lecture.
No.
No, not even one, right? So the things that they have to be cautious about, you don't have to worry about that with your children. And I had a neighbor time who said to me, how come all the kids in the neighborhood can roam freely and come and go as they please? And, it's I have my children under lock and key. And I laughed. I can explain. If you're coming to me to say that to me, then you don't understand. There's no point. Well, I just laughed and said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Because at a point where you don't understand that is a safety thing, and, you're criticizing me for keeping my kids under lock and key. there's no point in me explaining anything further to you. So
Absolutely. And yeah, it was definitely eye-opening. And, I know Black women who had needed their appendix removed. And when they went to the hospital, they were getting accused of being drug seekers and drug addicts. And my friend almost died. And they ended up having to do emergency surgery. And like, it looks like they butchered her. The scars from it are terrible because they just didn't listen to her. She didn't even want drugs. She was like, there's something wrong with me.
they didn't, they didn't care. They did not
Yeah,
care. They did not care. She's an inmate. Okay, first and foremost, she's black. She's black. She's a black woman. She's an inmate. She's considered the crud of society at that point, whether she was falsely accused or not. So they don't care. That is why a lot of black women would rather see a black doctor.
yeah,
Again, our kids under the care, and I'm so thankful for my pediatrician. He's one of the very few people that I would trust.
right,
Black babies under black doctors' care have higher survival rates than
right.
white babies under white doctors. Black women, we die at 4 times, 4-to-1 ratio, 4-to-1 ratio, 4 times to 1 of our white counterparts, our white sisters dying from pregnancy complication. And do you know what a lawmaker said? That the statistics will be so much better in America if we just don't include black women. Are we not human?
That's so disgusting.
So what you've seen, I'm glad you saw it, but what you see is just a fraction of what we have to experience on a daily basis. And
Right.
again, this is why kudos to you for speaking out on it. That is why I'm an advocate. That's why I have this platform to educate and advocate for people who may not know they have a second opinion or who may not know that they have legal standing to really advocate for themselves and seek justice for themselves because it is quite disgusting out there.
Yeah. I mean, the one and only prison riot I was almost involved in, a white girl was pregnant and she went into labor and they were not going to take her to the hospital. They were going to let that baby be born in a cell. And we were all like, no, no, you're taking her to the hospital. And they finally agreed to take her to the hospital. And they told her, if this is a false alarm and this is just Braxton Hicks, you're going to go into solitary. So when we're at the end of our pregnancy, false labors happen all the time. That is a normal thing. And they were literally going to punish her with solitary confinement if it was a false alarm. And like, I don't think people understand like the level of cruelty that goes on in these institutions. I mean, I was forced to strip in front of cameras for male entertainment by a female sergeant. And she still works there. She told another inmate to kill themselves and they had to cut that man down from a suicide attempt. She's still getting a pension. Like, these sociopaths are so protected within this system. And, it's your word against theirs and it doesn't matter because you've already been dehumanized as an inmate, as,
Right.
whatever.
Right. So I thank you for telling your story, and I like that your book is available for people to purchase. Do you have social media? Do you have a website so we can include that in the show notes? For the journey and see what you're up to.
Yes. I also am now working with state reps to get better bills on the table. Up in Maine, we got one passed that all jail facilities have to provide tampons and pads free of charge for women, as many as they want. So I am trying to get that passed federally because no woman should have to go without feminine hygiene. It's reprehensible. And I'm also working on some PREA bills. So you can find me I'm also on LinkedIn, Elizabeth Mikotowicz. I am on TikTok, Instagram. Don't worry about my Facebook. I'm still trying to get that fixed. But my handles are EPM_art_1111. And I am open to come speak. I will help you if you are in crisis, mental health, recovery. I will help you however I can. So drop me a message, or I also commission art. That's some of my art. And like I said, I painted my book cover. So I do portraits. I have an environmentally friendly clothing brand based on my art. And yeah, come find me. I'm available. And I would love to help any way I can. So
I love it. Kudos to you, Elizabeth. So, for anybody who did not catch that, please do not worry. We'll put all the links to all the things in the show notes. So you can click right into it and find all things Elizabeth. This was a great conversation. I feel like we haven't had all of the time to talk about all of the things. And we may have another conversation. I'm open to it. This was a good introduction, scratching of the surface. There are plenty and plenty of women, Black women and men, white women and men, also working for justice. Especially in the criminal justice system, and it is such a worthy fight. And help out, however, wherever you can. So. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being here.
And listen to Black women. Listen to Black women.
Yeah.
All the advice they gave me was life-changing. There'll be the wisdom that will change your life.
Yes. And for people that have been through so much, we are very loving. We take everybody in, and that is something that cannot be replicated.
No.
You listen if you want to, but if you want to learn, listen to Black women.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Unshelling Medicine podcast. If you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, make sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. Follow us on social media at Altruistic Scribe on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We share additional tips, updates, and health-related content that you won't want to miss. Have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes? Reach out to us at altruisticscribeco.com. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and tackle the health topics that matter most to you. Until next time, stay healthy and take care.